The sun beat down mercilessly on the parched red clay of the Deccan Plateau. Cracks spidered across the ground like ancient veins, each one whispering stories of drought, heat, and the secrets buried beneath. The research team had been camped on the outer rim of a dry basin for 3 days, installing geochemical sensors and collecting mineral samples, part of a long-term study into tectonic drift and the strange mineralization patterns emerging in the region. But so far, the Earth had remained stubbornly quiet. That morning, Dr. Meera Sinha walked the perimeter alone, boots crunching across the brittle soil, the horizon shimmer blurred in the heat. She paused to record ground temperature when something flickered in the corner of her eye. Movement. Slow. Intentional. 12 feet ahead, a cobra had emerged from the lip of a cracked rock, its thick body gliding across the ground like smoke. It paused, lifted its head, and began to coil tightly, forming a precise spiral. Its hood flared, not in aggression, but in warning. It hissed, low and deliberate, eyes fixed not on Mira, but on the ground. She froze, not from fear, from instinct. The snake wasn't targeting her. It was listening to something she could not hear. A tremble. Then she smelled it. Faint, sharp, unnatural. A chemical sting at the back of her nose, carried by the breeze. Mira slowly crouched and placed her gloved hand on the ground. It was warm. Too warm. She looked at the snake again. It hadn't moved. Still coiled. Still hissing. But now, its tongue flicked faster, tasting something just beyond perception. Mira grabbed her radio. "Base, this is Sinha. I need an atmospheric sweep at my location. Category 3 static." Then a reply. "Copy. Any seismic activity?" "Negative. But we may have a gas event." "I'm seeing animal behavior indicative of underground change. Possibly toxic." The snake uncoiled slightly, then slithered toward a crack in the earth and vanished beneath it. Moments later, the gas sensor lit up in her hand, blinking red. Sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, methane. The ground wasn't just hot, it was venting. Mira backed away fast, heart racing. Whatever had been brewing beneath the plateau hadn't ruptured yet, but the Cobra had sensed the shift before the machines did. Its hiss wasn't threat. It was the Earth's first voice, a whisper of warning that no one else could hear. Until now. Back at the mobile lab, the air was heavier. Not just with heat, but with tension. Mira entered in a rush, sensor in hand, her mask already covering her mouth and nose. Inside, Dr. Ethan Black and tech analyst Priya Deshmukh were hunched over monitors, watching real-time diagnostics flicker in red and amber. "I got gas," Mira said flatly, sliding the sensor across the counter. "Multiple compounds." Strongest at the northeast ridge, Ethan turned toward her, blinking in disbelief. "Without a quake? No structural displacement on the charts." "That's what makes it worse," Mira said. "Something's leaking upward without any seismic trigger. The soil's breathing, and the Cobra saw it first." Priya looked up sharply. "Cobra?" "It coiled, hissed. It wasn't scared of me, and it was warning me. Then it vanished into the crack just before my sensor went critical." There was a pause. Ethan opened a new window on the console and pulled up subsurface mapping from earlier that week. There was a fracture line mapped 3 years ago, dormant, sealed off. No activity since Mira leaned in. "Pull up the thermal overlay." The moment the heat map loaded, the room fell silent. A glowing vein of warmth had begun to pulse along the old fracture. Subtle, thin, but real. It traced a path like a capillary under skin, widening toward the direction where the Cobra had vanished. "There," Mira said, "that's where it started." "Sulfur dioxide at surface levels is lethal within minutes," Priya muttered, eyes scanning a fresh burst of warning data. "And methane's starting to spike too. If it accumulates and finds a spark—" "No one lights anything," Ethan snapped. Mira walked to the rear of the lab where the portable drone kits were stored. "We need a visual of the sublayers, and I want to test soil cores around that crack. I want to know how long it's been venting." She paused. "If it's new, we might still contain it. If not..." The implication didn't need words. A leak this quiet, This slow meant gradual poisoning, not just of the air, but the water table, the crops, the people nearby. It could devastate an entire region before the first visible sign appeared. As the drone launched skyward, Priya whispered, "How did the snake know?" Mira didn't turn around. They're tuned to vibration, micropressure, maybe even sense signatures we don't understand yet. The Earth speaks through animals first, and this cobra had hissed not at threat, but at awakening. The drone hovered like a hawk above the cracked plateau, its infrared sensors painting ghostly heat signatures across the dry terrain. Inside the lab, the monitor flickered with gradients, deep oranges where heat pulsed through the crust, eerie greens where the land cooled too suddenly. Mira studied the footage frame by frame, her eyes locked on the growing irregularities beneath what should have been stable Earth. A snaking path of warmth weaved through the ridgelines, sometimes vanishing, sometimes re-emerging like a buried serpent just beneath the surface. The pattern didn't match any known fault line, nor any man-made installation. It moved like breath, not in straight lines, but with rhythm and pause. The gas wasn't erupting in bursts, it was exhaling. Ethan stood over a table where several soil samples had been hastily labeled. "This came from the edge of the crack," he said, handing her a vial. "Smells like rot." Mira uncapped it cautiously. The scent was unmistakable. Hydrogen sulfide, dense and sulfurous, undercut with something faintly organic. Like decay sealed underground for years. Decay that had begun to seep upward. "The soil's too warm for this altitude," she murmured. "It's not solar. It's internal." "We're sitting on a lung," Ethan said, half joking, but no one laughed. In the field, a small weather station collapsed. Just like that. Caught by a sudden updraft of invisible force. The pole had been stable, grounded. But when they reviewed the footage, the truth was clearer. A gust of gas, not air, had surged upward, invisible to the eye, but dense enough to snap bolts loose and push a 100-pound rig sideways. The ground wasn't breaking apart, it was flexing. A call came through from the East team, Priya answered, nodding along as she listened, then turned to the others, face pale. They found dead birds near a dry pond. No trauma, no blood. Just collapsed mid-flight. Gas concentrations climbing. Mira's heart thudded. "That's our plume zone expanding." She looked outside. The air shimmered slightly above the ridge now, not from heat, but from density. Refracted, heavy, sick. The Cobra had not simply warned them of a single leak. It had emerged from the first breath of something vast, something slowly surfacing from beneath years of silence. And like a creature rousing from deep sleep, it had only just begun to stretch. They were no longer studying the earth. They were standing atop its lungs. By early evening, the heat had not lessened, only changed shape. It no longer radiated from above, but crept up from beneath. A steady warmth through the soles of their boots. The wind had stilled entirely. Even the usual chorus of insects had fallen silent, as if the entire ecosystem had paused, ears tilted toward the ground, waiting for what came next. Mira stood on the ridge where she had first seen the cobra. The crack where it had disappeared now looked wider, not visibly open but disturbed, like soil that had shifted and resettled under pressure. She crouched low, watching the way dust particles hovered over the crack, forming faint spirals before dispersing, like disturbed breath escaping a barely open mouth. "What did you feel?" she whispered into the air, as if the snake might answer. "What did you know before we did?" She had studied animal behavior in her undergraduate days. Migration, seismic response, atmospheric detection. There were patterns. Rats leaving coastal towns before tsunamis, birds going silent before tremors, dogs barking at phantom vibrations. But this cobra had done something more deliberate. It had performed a signal. The coil, the hiss, the posture. Not threat. Not fear. Message. Back at the mobile lab, Priya had begun compiling comparative data from nearby regions. She was the first to notice it. Reports of serpents appearing in places they hadn't been seen in decades. A village to the south had killed 5 cobras in one day, all of them emerging from fissures in hard-baked earth. Another district recorded 2 hospitalizations from unexplained snake bites, both within half a kilometer of sulfur gas detection. They're not hunting, Priya said quietly. They're being driven. Mira paced slowly. Or drawn, Ethan scoffed. Drawn to what? Toxic death? To heat, Mira replied, eyes still scanning the crack. To vibration, to movement beneath the ground. If there's a change down there, tectonic shift, chemical venting, a slow rupture, they'd feel it long before we would. Ethan said nothing. The sun dropped below the ridge. In the last golden light, Mira saw a faint shimmer along the crack. Not gas, not steam. A film of light, barely visible. A pulse. She dropped to one knee and pressed her hand to the soil. Warm, then a flicker. So faint she almost missed it, but unmistakable. Movement. From beneath, not a tremor, not a quake, a surge. Something massive shifting just under the crust. Like lungs inflating, like muscle flexing. She pulled her hand back and looked down the ridge toward the rest of the plateau. And suddenly she understood. The Cobra had not been warning her about a leak. It had been warning her about a living system awakening beneath them. Vast, hidden, and no longer content to remain quiet. The night settled in like a heavy shroud. Insects remained silent, birds unseen, and even the wind had abandoned the plateau. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was held breath, stretched thin over the land, like tension before a scream. Inside the mobile lab, the lights hummed too loudly, shadows stretching oddly across the walls as if distorted by unseen pressure. Mira sat hunched over the sensor readouts, each screen flickering with subtle anomalies. The gas signatures had spread, radiating in a strange pattern, not chaotic but concentric, like ripples emanating from a single unseen center. The data made no geological sense. We're not looking at a natural fissure, she said aloud, breaking the still. This is organized. It's venting in waves. Ethan leaned over her shoulder. You think the plateau itself is structured? I think it's behaving like something with intent. He stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or worry. But she didn't look away from the map. The Cobra coiled, she said, not out of defense, but as mimicry. It was reflecting the shape it felt beneath the surface. Priya's voice cut in from across the lab. Then we're standing on something that's either geological or biological. Silence again. Even the machines seemed to hesitate. That's when the deep frequency scanner began to chirp. Not high-pitched or frantic, but rhythmic. Thump. Pause. Thump. Pause. A pattern, like a heartbeat. Ethan checked the log. That's not seismic. It's too regular, Mira whispered. Too even. Suddenly, every sensor in the lab began a slow, synchronized blink. Red, green, red, green. The internal pressure dropped by 2 degrees. And outside, the dust that had lain undisturbed began to stir, rising in vertical lines, as if pulled by something unseen. Mira stepped outside, jaw tight, staring toward the center of the plateau. Lights from the drone glowed faintly in the dark sky above, still scanning. But beneath it, something had changed. A glow. Subtle. Like phosphorescence beneath the cracked crust. Not fire, not gas. Something waking. And then came the sound. Not a boom. Not a quake. A single resonant exhale. As if the entire earth below them had released its breath, slow and warm, through stone lungs. Mira turned to Ethan and Priya. We need to evacuate the eastern perimeter. Anyone on foot, anyone downwind. If this thing opens, it won't give a second warning. And the Cobra? Priya asked softly. Mira's gaze returned to the crack. It gave the first. The emergency lights on the mobile lab strobed across the barren plateau like a silent alarm, painting the dry red earth in pulses of crimson. The air had thickened, not with visible smoke or dust, but with weight, like walking through a room just before a thunderstorm breaks. Every breath now carried the faint, acrid sting of sulfur, and something far older. Mira could taste it in the back of her throat, metallic and bitter. She stood at the edge of the newly expanded fracture, where the Cobra had vanished days before. What had once been a narrow fissure was now a yawning seam, several meters long and splitting the plateau like a wound. A strange, flickering haze hovered over it, visible only at certain angles, like heat rising from asphalt, but colder, somehow more unnatural. It shimmered not with warmth, but with instability. Ethan and Priya had managed to pull most of the surface crew back to a safe radius, stationing them near the ridge's highest point. But Mira remained closest, unwilling to retreat before understanding what lay beneath. She lowered a microphone probe into the opening, its cord feeding back to the lab in real time. At first, nothing but static. Then, a low sound, distant and steady. A hum, not electronic, not mechanical. It vibrated in waves like a chorus of hollow voices buried beneath stone. Not speech, not music. Warning. Suddenly, the hum shifted, spiking upward, then stopping completely. Total silence. Even the faint wind ceased. Then the earth twitched. Just once. A single motion, not unlike the reflex of a sleeping beast disturbed by light. The crack widened. From its depth came a burst of gas, colorless but sharp. Mira stumbled back, coughing hard behind her mask. Monitors back at the lab screeched with spikes: methane, hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, and something else. Something the system couldn't classify. "Are you seeing this?" she barked into her headset. Priya's voice crackled through. "We're logging it, but the last compound is untagged. Whatever it is, it's not in any public database. No. But it's rising." On the screen beside her, a graphic showed the underground pressure pushing upward in pulses, like blood through a throat. The pattern was unmistakable. Every 20 seconds, a beat, a breath, a signal. Ethan spoke quietly over comms. "Mira, this isn't just venting. It's building toward release. Whatever's down there is reaching critical mass." And in that moment, the truth settled in her chest, like cold stone. This wasn't a fault line, or even a magma swell. This was a deep system, maybe natural, maybe ancient, maybe neither, that had remained dormant until disturbed. The Cobra had not simply sensed danger, it had sensed timing. And the hiss, the coil, had been not just a warning, but a countdown. The final breath came just before dawn, a moment where time hesitated, as though even the sun had paused beneath the horizon, uncertain whether to rise. The plateau was still. No birds, no wind, only the low, ominous pulse from the earth, beating once every 20 seconds, like a buried heart now ready to surface. Mira stood at the highest ridge, her silhouette outlined by the flicker of red warning lights behind her. Her mask hissed softly with filtered air, but even that seemed inadequate now. Beneath her boots, the stone felt hollow, like the ceiling of a chamber no one had ever entered. At 5:12, the pulse changed. It wasn't just frequency, it surged. From the lab below, Priya shouted into the comms, "All readings just doubled. Pressure, gas, subsurface motion." "Back everyone away now," Mira ordered. "Pull to secondary station." "We're past containment." Ethan slammed a fist on the drone controller. "We've got to get eyes on it." But the drone's feed blinked out, and then the sound came. Not an explosion, not a quake, a groan, deep, organic, as if the ground itself were parting with reluctance or pain. The crack that had started as a narrow slit now tore open like a wound, ripping in jagged lines across the plateau's center. Earth lifted in uneven slabs. Dust rose in slow-motion clouds. A vent, wide as a truck, exhaled a column of searing, invisible gas. A nearby tree withered instantly, leaves curling black without fire, bark blistering. Below in the cracks was light. Not flame, not magma. Something phosphorescent, pulsing, breathing. The geological signature couldn't explain it, but Mira didn't need data to understand. The Earth had birthed something not seen before, an ecosystem of pressure and death, forming beneath their feet over decades, maybe centuries. The gas wasn't a byproduct. It was the beginning, like breath from a sleeping lung. And the Cobra? It had been the first sentinel, a creature old enough to remember the Earth's subtleties. sensitive enough to know the difference between silence and warning. Its hiss had been a message, its coiling a mimicry of what stirred beneath. Mira activated the emergency beacon, transmitting a full evacuation alert to every outpost within 30 kilometers. Go wide, she said into her headset. Tell them this isn't just a gas leak. It's a slow eruption, chemical, maybe biological. We need satellite coverage now. As the first rays of sun split over the horizon, they revealed a scar across the landscape, a jagged, breathing mouth in the earth, still venting unseen toxins into the sky. The Cobra had vanished into it. It had returned to whatever secret womb had summoned it. And now, the humans knew. This was no longer a matter of science alone. It was witnessing. The ground had spoken through its oldest child, and it had said, I am not dormant. I am alive.